May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. It occurs to me that this Sunday could be called the Good News, Bad News Sunday. It is good news for all of us who are sinners and recognize that we are sinners. It is bad news for all of us that are righteous and think that we have somehow earned our way into God's grace and glory. For our readings tell us there is no way to earn one's way. Indeed, it is only through God's grace and through God's glory that any of us have any hope. The question then would be, well then, why try to live a good life? Why try to be like Christ? Why not just go like the younger son, have a great time, and then ask God's forgiveness at the end of life? Indeed, there were emperors who waited to be baptized until their deathbed, just so they could keep on, living the good life until the last moment. And then they figured, on their deathbed they get baptized and God would have to get them up to heaven. And there's always the key, that God would have to. God doesn't have to do anything based on anything that you or I have done. Everything we do that might be good, that might be gracious, that might be Christ-like, is simply a reflection and an offering back to God from all of the abundance that God has given us. Sadly, way too many Christians interpret the Christian faith as somehow a merit badge. That somehow we do certain things and that raises us closer to God, or we do other things and that takes us farther away from God. That isn't how it works, friends. One sin is equal to all sin. We all fall short of God's grace and God's glory. None of us deserve God's forgiveness. All of us receive God's forgiveness, and furthermore God's love, and furthermore God's abundance and graciousness out of God's goodness, out of God's love towards us. Anything you or I do that is good, that is gracious, that is Christ-like, is a response to our acknowledgement of that love and our desire to pass that love on in the world. As many of you know, we had yet another death in my family. One of the interesting things is, this is the part of my family that doesn't exactly go to church. Like they didn't go to church. Well, I think I remember the last time that we went to church with them. I think my 42-year-old nephew was less than 2 years old. And my mother, for Christmas, demanded that we go to church while she watched the baby. So, we can't exactly say that my brother and his wife grew up and taught their kids religion or anything like that. So as we were preparing for the funeral, one of the fascinating little things is we came across this slip of paper that said Jane's funeral. And then underlined and in capital letters was proper Episcopalian hymns. And she had chosen all religious music, well, except for the Beatles song. But everything else was proper Episcopal hymns. Which said to me that there was faith alive in spite of the lack of conforming to what I would have liked them to do. Then this week I had a phone call from the rector of the current rector of the parish that we had all grown up in. And she's somebody that I know, and she's calling me and she says, Chris, I got these checks in the mail for a Jane Humphrey. Who is she? And I said, well, that's my sister-in-law, and besides that, you're going to be getting more money. Is there something I should know? I said, well, you know, we all grew up at St. Paul's. This was St. Paul's, Nancy. And they wanted the church to be remembered in their will. And she said, well, I wish when was the funeral? Well, it was Saturday. Well, I wish I had known. I would have at least come, or I would have helped you with it. I said, oh, well, that was really nice. It didn't really occur to me and so there was a reconnection made for me. And I think it ties to today's greetings in that all of us are the prodigal son. All of us stray. And all of us are also the older son that act judgmental when we see anyone else being the prodigal son. You know, it's so much easier to see everybody else and their faults and their sins and their shortcomings than to accept or see our own. So we tend to like to compare ourselves. Well, I've gone to church probably 10,000 times more than my brother. I guess that means I'm going to get farther. No, it doesn't work that way. God's grace is sufficient and plentiful for every person. You and I come and gather in order to strengthen ourselves, in order to be God's people on this earth, and in order to lift up in prayer those who don't yet understand. Our reading from the Hebrew scripture, our first reading from Joshua, reminds us of this. The Israelites in the wilderness, if you remember, had no food, and God rained down manna from heaven for them. Food from the heavens so that they would not starve and die. In thanks for that, they decided, you know, it's kind of hard work to every day have to go out and pick this food. So how about if today we pick up enough for 3 or 4 days, and then we can just kind of relax for the next 3 days, only to learn the food was only good for that day. Of course, reminding us that God's grace and love is sufficient for this day, and that is all we need, and that we cannot store that up against a future time. But the Joshua story is also the good news, bad news. Because the good news was they make it to the promised land. The bad news was once they made it and ate the produce of the land, what happened to the manna? It disappeared. It was no more. Now they had to till the land, to care for the land, to gather up the crops for themselves. God expects us to take care of ourselves. You've all heard the joke about the guy in the flood and he's standing on the roof and, you know, the helicopter comes and he says, no, I'm waiting for God. And then the boat comes and he goes, no, I won't get in the boat. I'm waiting for God to save me. And, you know, when he drowns. And then he goes, God, where were you? He says, well, I sent you a helicopter. I sent you a rowboat. What did you need? We act and behave in the best way we can out of gratitude towards what God has given us, and in thanksgiving for the relationship that we enjoy with God, not to earn anything from God. And so on this, the pink Sunday of Lent, the lessening of the penitence of Lent, we are asked to remember that there is joy and that the purpose of our Lenten disciplines is to make us more aware of God's grace and God's goodness and God's love in our life, not so that we'll work harder to earn that, which we can't do at all anyway, but so that we will deepen our desire to be God's people out into the world, to reach out our hands, to expend our energy, our lives, bringing others to know of God's love and of God's care and of God's abundance in their life. Let us stand and reaffirm our faith in the words